HarperCollins presents Murder by Candlelight by Faith Martin, read by John Hopkins. For my literary agent, Kate Nash, for putting up with me for so long. England, summer 1924. Chapter 1. "Oh, hello, Mr. Swift. Might I just have a quick word with you about my ghost?" Now, this somewhat unconventional greeting would no doubt have disconcerted anyone other than Mr. Arbuthnot Lancelot Swift. However, Mr. Swift, known simply as that young fool Arby to his more discriminating friends and family, was made of sterner stuff. Or so he'd like to flatter himself. The more honest explanation for this display of savoir-faire, however, lay in the fact that, having just written a best-selling book about some of the nation's more prominent spooks, ghouls, spectres, and the odd banshee or two, it could be argued that he was better placed than most to take this sort of thing in his stride. "Good morning, Miss Phelps," he said, turning around to address the tall, grey-haired lady who was looking at him from a pair of thoughtful, watery blue eyes. "Lovely day and all that," he added cheerfully. Naturally, that worthy lady batted away this piece of frippery with barely an acknowledgment. Miss Phelps, he supposed, must now be in her late 60s, and was one of the wealthiest members of the Cotswold village of Maybury-in-the-Marsh. As a lifelong resident of the village himself, he was very much aware of the older lady's standing in the community, not to mention her notoriously gimlet eye, and could only hope that his Oxford bags and knitted jumper passed sartorial muster. Her family had held sway at the old forge for generations, her antecedents starting out as mere humble smithies, but through luck, judgment, hard work, and notorious parsimony had built up a business that was now the envy of many. But it had been her deceased brother who, like many industrialists, had made their biggest fortune from the Great War, and now the Phelps name could be seen written large on many a factory wall, not to mention on the doors of a string of garages and scrap metal merchant yards in 3 counties. Not surprisingly, Miss Phelps, as one of the very few remaining members of her family, bore evidence of her prosperity easily and without any apparent effort. Today, this took the form of an immaculately shabby tweed suit, specially tailored to fit her 5 feet 11 inches, a set of truly perfect pearls, the softest of kid leather gloves, and some sort of reptilian skin handbag that even Arby, not the most reliable judge of women's accessories, could tell was probably the envy of every woman for miles around. But for once, Miss Phelps wasn't acting quite her self-important self. Normally, she could be seen walking through the village like a member of minor royalty, deigning to mix with the peasantry. But this morning she seemed to be lacking some of her usual vim and vigour, and her eyes darted nervously up and down Old Mill Lane. "I was so hoping I might run into Mr. Swift. I think you're just the person to advise me," she said, though not sounding particularly convinced by her own statement, which Arby had to acknowledge was fair enough. It was rare indeed for anyone to ask his advice about anything. "Since you know all about restless spirits and that sort of thing, I mean," she added weakly. Even as she made this request, the pale blue orbs of her eyes were running over him with obvious misgiving. No doubt she was recalling all the times when, as a boy, he'd regularly scrumped her pears, gooseberries, and plums, and, on one occasion, had been directly responsible for the rapid entrance of a cricket ball through her, regrettably closed, dining-room window. Really?" he responded, uncomfortably. Whilst it behooved one to help out one's neighbours when called upon, of course, it was not something a chap actively encouraged. A lanky youth of 6'1", with plentiful dark brown hair and fine grey eyes, he sought desperately to think of a way of disentangling himself from what looked like becoming a bit of a tricky situation. For the truth was, the last thing he wanted to do was discuss ghosts and their doings. He'd set out that lovely summer morning to stroll to the village shop for the papers and some tobacco, and had intended to do nothing more strenuous afterwards than indulge in a spot of fishing in the river which ran along the bottom of his grounds. Now, it was fair to say that everyone who knew Arby well had been frankly astonished and bamboozled to see his
Sample complete. Ready to continue?